Good afternoon, everybody. It is that noon hour in the week of the 2026 Legislative Lunch and Learn series. This is our sixth year of doing this series, and we're very excited to have Secretary Fontes be our speaker today. We are anticipating a robust discussion on issues that are very worrisome to many of us in the League as a voting rights organization. And we are very grateful for the work Adrian has been doing in this space for such a long time. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and get started. Today's event is called Protecting Voter Rolls from Administrative Outreach. When we came up with the title, Secretary Fontes, we did that. At that time, that was the most pressing issue. However, it hasn't gone away, and we know there's a lot more that you will be sharing with us on how we might want to protect our elections. So today's presentation is brought to you by the League of Women Voters of Arizona, the League Advocacy Committee, and our presenter today is the Secretary of State, Adrian Fontes. And I am your moderator. I'm the state chair for the LWB AZ Advocacy Committee and a state board member. Today's program, we are going to, I'm going to introduce our secretary, give you a little bit of overview, and league members in attendance. So we always want to level set the league's history before we turn it over to Adrian, and of course gives me an opportunity to introduce Adrian to you all. Q&A, we have, well, I'm going to go over that in just a second. So let me move to that. So for today, please don't put your answers or questions in the chat because our facilitators, both from the Secretary of State's office and the Secretary himself and our league members will not be able to see it. However, we ask that you locate the Q&A function on your Zoom toolbar and use that to post questions. Don't wait till the very end. We encourage you to ask questions as we go along. This event is recorded, and we will have the event up on our YouTube channel for those who could not watch it or who want to hear the remarks of the Secretary more than once. This year we celebrate our 100th anniversary, 106 years old, and we have fighted and for the rights of voters for a very, very long time with our initial work in the suffragette movement in order to ensure the work has not stopped. And it appears that in this last 4 years, we have had to fight even harder to ensure that voting rights are preserved, that our voters are able to access the ballot without intimidation. We are also very, very focused on ensuring that the Congress does not pass legislation that would cause our citizens to not be able to vote because they lack the kinds of punitive IDs being required by Congress. In addition to that, we are equally concerned as the League with these issues, the protection of our elections, the attempt of federalizing elections, and more importantly, the effort to have an intimidating presence during the 2026 election. So with those sort of concerns foremost in all of our minds, I want to bring up for everybody that we are a nonpartisan organization. And it's not uncommon for people to think if you're nonpartisan, you're also non-political. And that is absolutely not true. We are both political, but we're nonpartisan. And what that means for us is that we do not endorse political parties or candidates. However, we work as closely as we can with the elected officials to ensure that citizens can vote without intimidation, without barriers, and our citizens themselves are well informed. And one of the ways in which we expand our ability to inform the voter is through our award-winning platform, Vote 411. This is where, and we've been very grateful to Secretary Fontes, who has, during all of his campaigns, actually provided the voters with very, very accurate information about elections and about his candidacy. So we're grateful for the participation of all candidates in Vote 411. We operate in we have about 800 state and local leagues, and this may not be known by everybody, but we do want all of our attendees to be aware of that. We also have leagues in the District of Columbia, Virgin Islands, and we used to have one in Hong Kong, but I recently learned that has been shut down because of the authoritarian regime in Hong Kong. Okay, and the way our major campaign is making democracy work by empowering voters and defending democracy. And we continue to build out that campaign through issues such as redistricting, voting rights, making sure that elections are protected and secure. With that, I would like to introduce to you who requires no introduction. So, Emra, if you would spotlight our speaker so that our members can see our speaker, please, that would be wonderful. Adrian, I'd like to add a little bit of a personal note of the league relationship with Adrian. Adrian has had a long, positive, and productive relationship with us as the league. He has been is available to us all the time to speak with our league members. More importantly, when he was the recorder, the Maricopa County recorder, two of our leagues in Maricopa County worked closely with him and his staff during the election cycles. Additionally, we are also very, very delighted that he is our Secretary of State because he has continued to advance issues that matter to us. The election protection manual, the education of our members, fighting through the state against administrative overreach. Some of you may know and have heard him describe his background. He is our 21st Secretary of State, okay, and he's a proud Arizona native, an honorable veteran of the United States Marine Corps, father of 3 daughters, lovely daughters, who have spent a lifetime fighting for justice and defending our democracy. He graduated from law school and masters and fighting for those who are disadvantaged. First as a prosecutor with the Denver District Attorney and then at the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. He later led the International Prosecutor Unit at the Arizona Attorney General's Office. He practiced law for 15 years before running for office in 2016 when he was elected the Maricopa County Recorder. He is committed to preserving integrity in our elections. We have seen that consistently in his work, his statements, his outreach, and to make it easier for voters and registered voters, ensuring that Arizona's business community has a nonpartisan partner in the Secretary's office. And this is important because the relationship between the Secretary's office and the business community is very vital to ensuring that we have the undergirding of sovereignty. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen so we can allow the Secretary to either share his screen or to speak to us directly. We are looking forward to hearing from you.
Well, thank you first, Penny, and thanks to the League for having me. It's an honor to be here during your lobbying week. I know you guys have had panel discussions already, and you've heard from America Votes recently. I'm here to chat with you a little bit about some of the things that we do here, some of the nuts and bolts stuff that you don't really hear from folks, and try to make sure that you all have the benefit of understanding how it is that it works kind of behind the scenes. And I'll give you a little bit of background on some of the stuff that we've been working on, some of the things that are in the news. I've got a couple of notes here on stuff that I want to talk a little bit about, but mostly I'd like to have a conversation. So I'm going to lean on Penny to make sure that we do have a conversation after I've made my initial presentation here. Just a little bit more on my election administration background. I didn't know much about elections when I ran for the Maricopa County Recorder's Office, and I don't think there's a lot of folks that grow up when they're kids in Nogales and say, when I grow up, I want to be the chief election officer for the second largest voting jurisdiction in the United States of America. Nope, but that's what ended up happening. And I had to learn on the job. And I reached out to a lot of folks who had been at Maricopa County for a long time. But I also talked to a lot of folks across the country because I think it's incredibly important that leaders have a broad perspective about what's happening in their profession, in the space that they want to operate, not just a very narrow scope of this is how we do it here and that's it. And that's why we ended up in Maricopa County with the ballot tracking system that we have, where you get those notifications by mail or by email or by text message if your ballot's coming to you when it gets back to the election department. I kidnapped that wholesale from the Denver election department, and I'm shameless about it. I don't care. We brought it to Arizona through Maricopa County and then later took it down to Pima County. In Maricopa County, we didn't have vote centers when I took over, but they'd been doing it in Yavapai County for 12 years, or since 2012, I should say. So quite some time before Maricopa County adopted it, and it's worked great for our voters. We've significantly reduced the number of provisional ballots because any voter in that county can now vote anywhere. And so once we started doing that here in Maricopa County, our provisional ballots went down significantly, which was good because it saved us a lot of work. It saved the voters a lot of angst. And we just were much more efficient in the administration of our elections, which actually saved us a lot of money too, which was good. And so that process of learning put me in a really, really good spot. And I also got my CIRA certification through the Election Center, which is a nonprofit organization based at Auburn University that gives this certified election and registration administrator certificate. It's so far it's the one that nationwide has been really instrumental in starting to professionalize the profession. But now through the fellowship program that we have here at the Secretary's office and the coalition that we've built with the three major universities in Arizona, the U of A, Arizona State, and Northern Arizona University, there is now a program where students are actually getting formal degrees granted by the Board of Regents that have that formal certificate attached to them. So we're really upping the ante as we move forward in the development of the profession of election administrators. So it's not just about how we impact out there the voters, but it's about bolstering the knowledge base inside of not just my administration or myself personally, but how we're impacting that nationally. That's really important for me because you got to leave the place better than you found it. And at some point, it's going to be other folks taking over. Not after this coming November, hopefully, but we won't talk about the political side of things as it pertains to me, but really just bolstering the profession, moving things forward, getting folks in to the profession and giving them the right kinds of formal training that they require, which didn't exist before, the 2016 through 2020 election cycles. Folks would just show up on the door and OJT, right, on the job training, figure out how to make elections happen. And that's how it was across the entire country. So I've been a part of, and my administrations have been a part of really pushing things forward and sort of the academic side and the professional development side of elections administration. And I'm very proud of the work that we've done and my staff, many of whom who were with me at Maricopa are now with me at the Secretary's office, kind of moving that agenda forward. So some of the things that we've worked very closely on are administering and doing the M&O, the maintenance and operation of a lot of the laws that are unique to Arizona, or at least were unique to Arizona, like, for example, documented proof of citizenship, like identification at polling places if you go to vote in person. It's very interesting the way that we have put these processes together on the ground here in Arizona, and the way people talk about them, nationally. We had, the Secretary of Homeland Security here very recently saying, "Oh, we've got to have, ID at the polls." Hey, guess what, Madam Secretary? We do. Oh, we got to have documented proof of citizenship. She said, "Guess what? We've been doing that for 20 years." So I think her staff has to do a better job of briefing her on that stuff. But whatever, we run good elections here in Arizona. We always have. And we continue to make them better and better, more secure and more accessible, which I'm very happy about. Until recently, anyway, that's been the trend. So what I wanted to do was chat a little bit, give you a little bit of background on the whole voter data to the Department of Justice story, and then we can get into many other things. So back in let's say February, March, about a year ago timeframe, we started seeing some disturbing stuff coming out of Washington, D.C., and the administration had started cutting a lot of the services that the Critical Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, or Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, that CISA from the Department of Homeland Security was giving us at the states and at all the states. They were supporting our creation of our training for tabletop exercises. They were doing physical and cybersecurity inspections at our county facilities, all the way down to the county facilities. They were helping us with software. They were helping us with some hardware in the form of Albert sensors and so forth. There was a lot of things that they were doing to help bolster our security profiles. And that started back in January of 2017 through the first Trump administration, developed more during the Biden administration. But then once Trump 2.0 administration started, they cut that off totally and wholesale. So we were a little bit worried about that. But then in June of last year, at the end of the month, we got a letter from the Department of Homeland Security that said, we want all of the data in your voter records, to include all of the data in your voter records. Now, interestingly, they never made a request for the publicly available voter rolls. They didn't do the public records request that you typically get from folks who want to do some work with our voter rolls. Now, understand that the voter rolls are public information. It's stuff that folks can get a hold of if they're using it for certain purposes. So the statute limits why you can get this information. The political parties get an update every month, and the data really contains a lot of information. It has voters' first and last names, the year of their birth. It has their street address. It has their political affiliation. You can get the voter, how many times they voted in what elections they've voted, which include jurisdictional elections, include primary elections, presidential preference elections, and of course, general elections. So there's a lot of data out there that you can get from the publicly available voter rolls. But they never asked for that. They never asked for any of that. What they asked for was the sensitive data and information in the voter rolls that is not permissible to be disclosed. And as I reach over here and grab the Arizona revised statutes, I'm flipping to 16.168, and I'm looking to get to subparagraph F, which I'll read directly from. And it says here, nothing in this section shall preclude public inspection of voter registration records at the office or county recorders for purpose prescribed in this section, except that the month and date of birth, so not the year, the month and date, the social security number or any portion thereof, the driver's license number or non-operating identification license number, the Indian census number, the father's name or mother's maiden name, the state or county of birth, and the records containing a voter's signature and a voter's email address shall not be accessible or reproduced by any person other than the voter by an authorized government official in the scope of the official's duties for any purpose by any designated entity of the Secretary of State as a voter registration agency, in pursuant to the National Voter Registration Act of 1993. Notwithstanding any other law, blah, 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 the voter's email address cannot be released for any purpose. A person who violates this subsection or subsection E of this section is guilty of a Class 6 felony. But here's the problem. the Department of Justice said, "Oh, we've got to make sure that you're in compliance with the Help America Vote Act." And I'm like, that's not legit. And I'm not going to subject myself to a felony for that. So no, you can't have it. Then they said, well, the National Voter Registration Act or the Civil Rights Act, we got to make sure you're in compliance with these ish. I'm like, well, which one is it? And their justifications kept shifting. And so as the correspondent went back and forth, they'd ask, I'd say no. They'd ask, I'd say no. We ended up kind of at a deadlock, as many states did, and we finally ended up getting sued, as many states had been prior to the lawsuit against Arizona. And I kept saying no, because as you can see through the list, that's some pretty sensitive information. And if it got out, your identity could be subject to being stolen. And that's not something that I really want to happen to Arizona's voters. And so I really was fighting against it. And I'm going to continue to fight against it. Moreover, there's another piece of law, the Privacy Act of 1974, that says you can't have this data. Why? Well, it's a post-Watergate piece of legislation that dictates that Congress was so concerned because different parts of the federal government were compiling information on Americans, and they were using it to create blacklists, to intimidate journalists, to go after activists, only because they were holding unpopular beliefs, not because anybody was breaking any laws. And so Congress said, no, federal agencies cannot collect this sort of data unless they have a specific purpose. So let me give you a for example. The Social Security Administration has a bunch of your information, but they can't give it to the FBI. The FBI may have information on you as a witness to a crime or a victim or some other thing. They can't give it to, the Treasury. The Treasury can't give it to the Veterans Administration. The Veterans Administration can't give any of it to anybody. So they're little individual pockets that have maybe a lot of data. And we look at the federal government as this big giant monster, but the reality is each of these little administrative pockets has restrictions on what data they can get and how they can use that data. And that has created these legal walls that sequesters this data. Well, when Elon Musk and the Doge people started coming in early during this past administration, or during this current administration, somehow, some way, one of these folks put the Social Security data on 300 million Americans, uploaded it to an unsecured server. Now, we're not sure if any of that was compromised, but it's like I can't justify handing over to an administration that's careless Arizona's voter data, particularly the sensitive stuff that I'm barred from turning over. So not just the Privacy Act of 1974 or the Arizona revised statutes, just basically kind of the security question is what I wanted to preserve. So that's sort of the story of how these things happen. They ended up suing us in November. We are currently engaged in that lawsuit right now. And while I can tell the story about all of that, I can also say I hope we will have some movement in the next month and a half on this case. But very similar, almost identical cases have been filed in Oregon, California, 24 states total, I should say. But in Oregon, it's been dismissed on the merits. The Department of Justice lost. In California, dismissed on the merits. Department of Justice lost. In Michigan, dismissed on the merits. The Department of Justice lost. In West Virginia, Chris Warner, the Secretary of State, very right-wing, very MAGA, he told them no. The Department of Justice lost to Chris Warner on the merits, right? Now, the Georgia case was also dumped, but that was a little more procedural instead of on the merits, but the Department of Justice hasn't refiled and they haven't tried to open the case again. So they're losing across the country because they know that what they're asking for is not allowable. Now, 11 different states had turned that data over. I'm worried about what might happen to those voters. But we're going to stand strong. Arizona's data is not going to get turned over. And so I don't think voters in Arizona have too much to worry about that. But let me talk a little bit about a couple of things I just mentioned off the cuff in the intro here. The question of documented proof of citizenship has been an issue that's been really on the forefront of the sort of election lies landscape and part of that narrative for some time. Now, I say election lies because even the Heritage Foundation, which could not be considered part of the political left, recently did a survey of all of the non-citizens who have voted in America since I want to say it was either 1982 or 1984. And what they found was, I'm kind of chuckling because they found that 68 times since that period, um, a non-citizen has cast a ballot. Not been registered. There's been a bunch registered, but we found them and knocked them off the rolls. Many of those folks were prosecuted. None of them ended up being able to get citizenship, as I understand. But since the early 80s, 68 non-citizen votes have been cast in the United States of America, the whole country. Think about the billions of votes that have been cast. I mean, you're talking about all the municipalities, all the county courts, or all the county commissions, and boards of supervisors, all of the state legislatures, all of the presidential races, all of the congressional races. 68, according to the Heritage Foundation. And then the Bipartisan Policy Center has put out numbers that say if the Save America Act, which is going to be demanding not only documented proof of citizenship, but photo ID, if the Save America Act comes forward and ends up passing and getting signed, happens to come forward, that up to 22 million Americans will end up being kicked off the voter rolls or being denied the right to vote because they can't afford or can't get, just it doesn't exist, their citizenship paperwork. And all this time, in the vast majority of states in the union, what is required is a signature under penalty of perjury, a sworn affidavit that you are a U.S. citizen, that you are over 18, that you're not ineligible because of a felony conviction or something of this nature. Now let's think about the juxtaposition here in the facts. The facts are, and this is according to the Heritage Foundation, folks. This isn't some liberal think tank. These are the guys who created Project 2025. 68 since the early 80s. That's 1.4 per year. Now, how many millions of Americans voted for president in 2024, in 2020, in 2016? And you're talking about 1.4 votes, not million, just 1.4 votes per year since the early 80s. You're talking about 0.60 something percent. It's ridiculous that we're willing to cast aside up to 22 million actual American citizens for 1.4 voters per year. And so with that background in mind, we have come to the place in America where people are crazy because leadership matters. And leadership has been lying about millions of ineligible voters voting in American elections. That's what's been motivating this movement. Now, Arizona is a little different because Arizona had a very different attitude. Back in 1996, we decided that in order to get a state benefit, you had to be legally present. Okay? Not motivated by election lies, but motivated by whatever was motivating Arizona back in 1996, 30 years ago. They said to get a driver's license, to get an operating ID, to get whatever, you had to be legally present in the country. Okay. So you go down to the MVD and you got to present something that shows that you're legally present. But in 2004, fast forward, we decided you had to be a citizen to vote in Arizona elections. Now that's different, right? Okay, legally present versus citizen. And what ended up happening? Russell Pierce himself, the godfather of SB 1070, said, everybody who has a driver's license pre-October 1st, 1996 is grandfathered in as a citizen for the purposes of voting without documented proof of citizenship, because they knew that the burden would be too heavy on actual citizens. So they're like, just everybody who has sworn under oath can just be grandfathered in. That's why we had the issue that we had in September of 2024, because we identified a bunch of folks in the old MVD records who hadn't proven citizenship. They were grandfathered in. And so we've been battling this documented proof of citizenship battle because of the history of Arizona and how things worked out. And then we bifurcated our ballots after 2013. There's a whole bunch of stuff that goes on afterwards. But we've been dealing with this issue in Arizona for many, many, many years. And the motive was very different. The reason we did it was different than what is being reasoned now. So Arizona is uniquely positioned in this documented proof of citizenship fight. We have a historical context that doesn't apply to the rest of the country. To attempt to make documented proof of citizenship a requirement to vote in all of the United States outside of Arizona, based on the fact that since the early 80s, only 68 votes have been cast by folks who are not citizens, is insane. And I can tell you right now, I believe that the strict scrutiny standard that the Supreme Court will eventually apply to this, if it passes and becomes law, and when it gets litigated, if it passes, will defeat it. Because the facts on the record, which is why the 60 whatever cases after the 2020 election got dumped, the facts on the record are that while there are infinitesimally small numbers of non-citizens that do eventually not just register but cast a ballot, that number is vanishingly rare. And so in order to adjust for this, they're saying 22 million people potentially can't vote anymore. It's insane. Here's the thing. It impacts married women, particularly older Americans, and it does have an impact on members of the military and students who are registering to vote, anybody who might have a little bit of a difficult time finding the paperwork. So that is a little bit of history and some context on the documented proof of citizenship fight insofar as sort of the background of it. Moving forward, I don't think that the SAVE Act, as it's being presented in Congress, is going to pass. I think that there's enough folks in the Senate who understand the reality of this. And in the Senate, thankfully, we've got folks on 6-year terms. They're going to survive this particular administration. So politically, they're like, whatever, we're just going to say no. And hopefully that stands. But I wanted to give you that little bit of background. We also ask for ID at the polls in polling places in Arizona. So we're in a very unique position as a state vis-a-vis the current political sort of machinations when it comes to that sort of thing. So I wanted to just kind of cover voter data and the privacy issues, cover the documented proof of citizenship stuff, and make sure that we also talk about a couple of other things, one of which I think is pretty controversial, but I want to let folks know about this one, and that is the potential for this administration to try to disrupt voting on election day by deploying federal agents to polling places. The pretext of which has to be some kind of emergency act, because otherwise the authorization doesn't exist for that to happen. And let me talk about how we know that's absolutely true. In the Arizona Senate recently, Senator Jake Hoffman had introduced a piece of legislation, SB 1507, that would have explicitly allowed ICE agents to enter polling places. Now, why would he do that? Some people are saying, oh, it's just political. Some people are saying, oh, it's just a fundraising thing. Well, here's what I think it is. I think it's an absolute acknowledgement that ICE agents are not allowed into polling places in Arizona. And I'll tell you why I think that, because I know that's what the law says, and that's what the Elections Procedures Manual says. We wrote it here in this office. The only folks that are allowed inside of polling places are elections officials who are doing the things they do, checking IDs, issuing paper ballots, which is all we vote on, and helping voters, and the voters themselves, right? Now, each of the county chairs has the opportunity and the ability under law to appoint poll observers, and partisan poll place observers can also be present, but they can't do anything. They've just observed. They can't interact with voters. They can't interact with staff, except the person who's the lead poll worker. If there's any kinds of concerns or if they're seeing something happening, then they can talk to that person. But I think it's really important to understand that while the Trump administration is using this ICE as a cudgel against this weird fantasy that they have that, the illegals are taking over the world. So we've got to protect our elections and we've got to, get the rapists and murderers off the street. What's happened in Minnesota, what's happened across the country, and even the introduction of this legislation shows that they're operating outside of the law. And as it pertains to elections, we even saw the Department of Justice send a letter to the governor and elections officials, my friend Secretary Steve Simon in Minnesota, and say, we'll take the ICE agents off the street if you give us all of this unredacted voter rolls. That's extortion, plain and simple. I've said so publicly, and that's not how this is supposed to work. And that's not a partisan thing. It's not because I'm a Democrat and this is a Republican administration. That's because they're saying, we will take our thugs off the street if you give us this thing that we want. And that's literally how organized crime works. They come in your neighborhood, as I've said before, they beat a bunch of people up, and then they say, well, if you give us what we want, we'll take our thugs off the street and we'll stop beating you up. That's not how you're supposed to govern. And it's a tragedy that has resulted in the loss of civilian life. And it's really bad. And it's not how America is supposed to work. And so, this administration has blended and bled a whole bunch of stuff into this one grievance that doesn't exist. And the grievance is that the president still believes he won the 2020 election without any evidence, and he's blaming the phantom non-citizen voters that even the Heritage Foundation have said don't exist. So that's why we are where we are, one person's grievance. And let's call a spade and give the person credit. This is an incredibly powerful political figure. And that's why leadership matters. I said it before, I'll say it again. His leadership, albeit motivated by personal grievance, is very powerful. And he has the capacity to move an entire government right now. And that's where we are. That's not like, we can't say, well, that's not how America is. That's how we are today. And I think we're trying everything that we can to get our democracy back, because what we've seen is a lack of checks and balances at that level. But I digress. Let me talk a little bit about some of the background technology that we use to make some of these things happen. So it'll get a little wonky here for a minute, but I want folks to understand.
Adrian, before you get wonky, I do want to pose a question on the subject that you just raised, which is the how did they arrive at the data that says 22 million people will not have the documentation, for the SAVE Act? How did they arrive at that number or approximation of that number?
That's a great question, Penny, and thank you for asking. So that number comes from the Brennan Center for Justice. The Brennan Center for Justice is based out of New York University. They have a sort of a democracy division that has been, frankly, a great partner to elections administrators across the country. And what they did is they went out and they surveyed and did their social science numbering stuff. Again, this is an estimation, of course. They went out and they looked at how many folks potentially were born on, I don't know, like Native American reservations, where there are, in many cases, no birth certificates that get issued. And they may only have tribal IDs, which are not accounted for in the SAVE Act. So those folks might be part of this. Where you have older Americans, particularly women who've changed their name and may not have access to either their birth certificate or their marriage certificate. So one of these documents is missing to be able to tie that person back to their citizenship. Because a marriage certificate doesn't have your citizenship on it. And if you don't have a birth certificate that has your actual last name that you're using on your government ID, you can't tie A to B, right? So these are the sorts of things that they use to estimate around the country to get them to that 22 million number. And I encourage you to go to the Brennan Center for Justice. They've got that in one of their studies. I can't remember exactly when it came out, but they have issued a number of different reports in the division Not their, I don't think it's their civil rights division. I think it's their democracy division. And again, we've worked very closely with the folks who've done that in the past. In full disclosure, I worked directly with the Brennan Center on SB1 when I was not an elected official, in the doing some analysis for them on that stuff. So good folks, and they've got all their stuff out there publicly. But I'm not an expert in their methodology, Penny. I'm sorry, I can't get more specific.
No. But I'm so glad you mentioned the Brennan Center, because we have been promoting their reports
Yes.
in all our communication with our members. And they're also very good partners with the League and have represented
Yes.
us on a number of issues. So we're very grateful for that. Adrian, I have a couple of questions which are tied a little bit more to what you've already covered. And I'm so glad you said something about this is not the way America ought to be, but this is where we are. And I think all of us need to pivot away from this is not who we are, because this is who we are, and now have to grid ourselves to figuring out, if this is who we are, how do we fight back, and how do we protect our neighbors and our families and so on. So thank you for reminding us of that. There's supposed to be 38 potential ballot referrals. I don't know if that's accurate, because that's not the number we are saying. I'm not sure where the member got that number from. What kind of planning do you go in? Are we anticipating a long ballot referral like we did the last time around?
Well, I leave that to my good friends down in the state legislature. I don't like second guessing those folks, and just like the Arizona Voters First Act, no bill is dead until after sine die. Many of the bits of legislation, including referrals to the ballot from the legislature, can emerge at just about any time in the process, including and up until the last bit of budget negotiations. And so we're not going to have a completely clear picture until that time. Now, we do know of one referral that has passed the House, and an identical referral has passed the Senate. This week is the week where the bills switch, and I think you guys have, you'll get some more information on how that works on, I think, the 27th or the 26th. Right. So I'll leave that for that discussion, but it is, I will just say it's an interesting piece of legislation that I'll probably be working against. But just like that one is moving through, so the Arizona Voters First Act is not moving. Now, we've proposed this, and I don't know if you've had too much time to talk about it, but I'll take a few seconds here. You can go to azvotersfirst.com and get all of the facts. It is a piece of legislation with 10 really important proposals. Most of them are very straightforward, very well vetted, and frankly, very popular, including the return of the permanent early vote list, so that voters who vote by mail don't have to reapply and worry about getting kicked off the early vote list. That's a critical, very pro-voter one. The funding of the ballot tracking and ballot curing systems that we use to make sure that folks get communicated with, that maintain our accountability and transparency in our processes, and make sure that every vote actually gets taken care of. And that is azvotersfirst.com if you want to put pop a link in there. Some of the other provisions include a fund, a perpetual fund to help us maintain our information technology systems, some money for Eric to enroll Arizona and keep us with the ability to maintain our voter rolls. And by the way, let me talk really quickly about that. Eric is the Electronic Records Information Center, or Electronic Information. Anyway, Eric, it's a multi-state data space where individual states will join, and they will take and send anonymized voter data up into the database, and it has this methodology of matching it with other states and then sending the data back so that we can check and clear our voter rolls. And through that method, specifically through that method, we found 28 cases out of the 300 and some that were referred back to us with possible problems, 28 where we had enough evidence to refer to the Attorney General for prosecution. 25 of these cases we would never have known about without Eric, right? These are folks who voted outside of Arizona in an election cycle and then in that exact same election voted in Arizona later. Now, there are folks who voted in Arizona and voted in other states, but if you're the first state, you can't really prosecute them. So 25 instances of voters who voted outside of Arizona first and then inside of Arizona, we've sent those to the Attorney General. Two cases where we saw a person double voting in Arizona and one where someone used a deceased person's registration to vote. We've sent these to the Attorney General. So the or the Arizona Voters First Act puts permanent funding into the budget for the Secretary of State so that we can maintain the voter rolls and keep them clean. Like, who doesn't want that, right? That's something very simple that's in this proposal. And so of those 10, some of them that I just mentioned, we want that to happen. So while some of the stuff like killing ballot by mail and mandating that you all stand in line, that's moved through both chambers and it's switching now, ours has yet to have a hearing. The Arizona Voters First Act that has this common sense, maintaining the voter roll stuff, which I'm really kind of disappointed that the legislature is taking this very common sense, very popular pieces of legislation. They don't have to do all of it, but just some of it's so obviously necessary, and then just throwing it out willy-nilly because it wasn't proposed by a member of the majority party. It's unfortunate. And so, we want to improve the way Arizona's voters have access. We want to improve our transparency. We want to make sure that the operation and management and maintenance of these voter rolls is healthy, and that we're going after the bad guys, as it were, which I think is the mandate that we have from not just from the law, but from our voters. And so I'm excited about hearing more voices promoting the Arizona Voters First Act as we push forward through the legislative session. So, Penny, I'm happy to answer more questions.
Yeah, well, Adrian, on the Arizona Voters First, we have come out in very strong support of it. But my question to you is this: if it didn't get a hearing, what is the pathway for us to continue to push? What is they're done with they're going into crossover. When is the opportunity to bring it forward again or push really hard? We're asking our members to do that, to call the legislator and say, you've got to give it a hearing.
Well, Penny, we didn't come into this expecting, blanket success. We came into this knowing that we had a hostile political environment at the legislature. I think continued public pressure and continued political pressure to get these nonpartisan, very common sense solutions heard is the most little d democratic way that we can make this happen. Should I find myself, I'll just be very blunt, should I find myself in a position to still be in this office when the next legislative session happens, if we don't get this done this time, then we might try a different path. We might go to, depending on the makeup of the legislature, we might try it again. We might try an initiative. We're not really sure. But at this stage of the game, this is one of those things that we're just really working on to have a sober and mature conversation about what's best for Arizona's systems, what's best for our voters. And the great thing about this is that it doesn't impact political outcomes at all. All it does is it secures what needs to be secured, which is funding for our IT security systems, funding for our voter roll maintenance systems. It brings back the permanent early vote list, which was wildly popular with Arizonans. And it does several other things that really ensure. And there's a couple things in there that I think some people are very passionately against. For example, unlike almost every other government system at the state level, our elections administrators cannot take outside money to help educate the public. So I can't take money from the League of Women Voters to promote the time, place, and manner, just basic information for voters. I can't take any support from you all to do that because there's a prohibition in law from me being able to take even League of Women Voters resources to do that. And that's problematic because we're not getting any money from the legislature to do any of that anyway. So my voter education budget is non-existent, basically, right? We use like social media to do that sort of stuff, which is when we should be paying for advertising to get more people registered and to get more people voting. And if we can't do it, then somebody else should be helping us with the funds necessary to do that. So that's one of the things that I know there's some folks down in the legislature who are, got all scared about Zucker bucks and all that weirdness. So there's that prohibition. We're looking to override that. So is that a little more political? Well, it's not political, but I guess there's some
Yeah.
people that are paranoid about that. So maybe it's a little more controversial, maybe not political. But so, it's an aspirational bill in the first place. And we understood that this was going to be a very, very steep uphill battle as we introduced it and began pushing it. But that's all we can do is really keep pushing unless and until the voters give us a legislature that has a makeup that's much more reasonable and even-minded. So what I can recommend is that we just keep up the pressure any way that we can if this is something that you can get behind.
We are very much in support of it. It is very common sense, and none of us are ready to give up on it yet. So that's a good thing. I have a couple of questions that are relevant to what you presented, and I think this next one is it's an interesting question, Adrian, and that is like the SAVE Act. Did any Arizona Republican representatives in the U.S. House reach out to you as the Secretary of State to become better informed about the facts in Arizona?
No, no, they don't care
Okay.
what I think. No, our Republican delegation is well. I'll just say it. They are hyper partisan in that they will not reach out to me because I'm a Democrat. They don't care that I'm an expert in state election administration in Arizona. They don't care about my experience. They don't care about the fact that that I've made very, very nonpartisan decisions, frankly, some of which aren't exactly popular with the Democrats in Arizona. Let me just say. I mean, the Democrats are suing me over my, letting the Arizona Independent Party decide what its own name was going to be. I've been sued by the state Democratic Party for that. And that doesn't help Democrats. So it was a nonpartisan decision. It was just like, what does the law say? What does the Constitution say? What do these voters want? So there's folks out there who will take their hyper partisanship to extremes and not go to the experts because they think the experts are corrupt or somebody told them that the experts were lying. Like, I don't get it. I used to have faith that there were folks on both sides of the aisle who were interested in data. They were interested in talking to experts. They were interested in being well informed, not misinformed. They were interested much more in the folks with the experience than the folks on podcasts, dictating to them how they should lead and how they should make decisions. But we're living in the upside down world right now. And it's unfortunate. It's bad for their voters. I think if the SAVE Act went through, there would be a lot of Republicans who would be taken off of the voter rolls. Um, there are a lot of older Republicans who are transplants from outside of the state of Arizona who would not be able to provide their birth certificate. It's just that simple. And we saw it when we were doing the analysis after the September of 2024 when we were looking at the motor vehicle division data issue that we had, and most of a majority, I won't say most of the voters because it wasn't a big majority, but a majority of the voters who would have had problems were registered Republicans, older voters, and so I think a lot of folks are making policy decisions based on, again, what they're hearing on cable news and on podcasts. And they're not even second guessing any of that or approaching any of us who would give them straight up honest answers and saying, hey, does this have a negative impact? How much will this cost? Um, and that's just bad decision making. It's just ab initio. It's just bad decision making. Um, let me open that up just a little bit on one of the bills that has been moved for that's going to be switching sides here. The notion of getting rid of ballot by mail means everybody has to vote in person. Well, when you have 80% of your voters voting in person, well, let's kind of do the math there. That means only 20% of your voters are voting in person right now. That means you would have to increase by fivefold all of the resources that you spend, all of the spaces where people vote, because you're basically relegating everybody to standing in line in one day and having to show their ID. But nobody's done the fiscal analysis on that. Nobody knows how much it's going to cost to get all of the equipment, to rent the spaces, to hire the minimum 7 employees, because we don't do volunteers in Arizona. We pay people to stand in those polling places, 7 in every single one. So take the number of polling places and the amount of money that you spend per ballot for in-person voting and multiply that by 5. We don't have the money for that. We literally don't have the ability to pay for that. And the counties aren't going to absorb that cost. Hell, we've been paying for the voter registration, maintenance and update in the Avid system for all of the counties using ARPA funds and doing like running and chasing over money because the counties don't have the money for that. We've got one county that's been running a several tens of thousands of dollars deficit for years. They're not supposed to run deficits. Like we just don't have the money to kill ballot by mail voting. It doesn't exist. And so the fact that people are putting this up for a referenda on the ballot with no real analysis, no eye towards how much it will cost. It's insane. It's insane, and it's motivated by the election denialist lie. And so let's think about that for a minute. If you grew up believing in Jack and the Beanstalk, and you went out and bought yourself a big giant axe at a deficit because you swear someone's going to plant that magic bean and you don't want the giants from up in the clouds coming down it, like your neighbors would think you were nuts. But you're making fiscal decisions based on mythologies, right? That's exactly what's happening here. That's exactly what's happening with your tax dollars from your representatives. And so, that's the frustration that we have to deal with in Arizona. Instead of dealing with all of the other issues that we have, instead of dealing with water, instead of dealing with, data centers, instead of dealing with transportation issues that we have, instead of dealing with all of the other issues that are so important, housing and jobs and workforce development, we're talking about killing ballot by mail. So anyway, sorry. I get frustrated just
No,
thinking
that's
about it.
Adrian. We are very frustrated with that too, and of course, we will be coming out strong against all that nonsense. But just a couple of things. You brought up the counties, and there is a question: how can there be help for rural county without working machines and not having ballots?
Well, you can't have an election if you don't have ballots. And you can't, and understand that most of the counties do not have tabulation at the polling places. Those of us who live and work in Maricopa County and understand that there are ballot tabulators at each of our vote centers in Maricopa County. Most all of the rest of the counties transport their ballots back to the election department and tabulate their ballots at a central tabulation location. And again, this is an example of the bottom-up nature of Arizona's elections. We make the rules here at the Secretary's office, but we don't tell folks how to do it. If they're following the rules, we're good to go. And we do run several elections at the same time. And so the question of resources is really a very important question. So let's talk about that very briefly. First of all, how is it that we run several elections at the same time? Okay. So a ballot by mail election is a different kind of election than an in-person election, even if you've still got ballot replacement centers and early balloting. Why? because the way that you track each of the individual voters and their ballot is different than an election day in-person uh, election. Okay. And because there's significant differences there, you have different checks and balances within the system. So all of the elections start with your voter registration. Voter registration rolls, which are continuously maintained. I already talked about a little bit of that. And then you have that cutoff date, 29 days before election day. And we in Arizona have a 2-day grace period for the election department to verify this voter roll matches with these ballots that we're going to be sending, for example, in the mail, because we've got early voting for 27 days in Arizona. So voter registration cuts off date 29. Now you have your list. And these lists have been vetted pretty carefully. You've heard the different bits of voter information that we have to verify that a voter is a voter in the internal voter list. We have what we call hard matches, and some people look at soft matches. We do hard matching to make sure that our voters are at a residential address or a qualified address, and that everything else matches up. Okay, so once we have those voter rolls with a ballot by mail election, then we run through and decide and determine who has asked for a ballot in the mail, and we send those ballots out in the mail. And as the next several days go on, many voters will ask for their ballot in the mail if they haven't received it. If they have received it, they'll start sending it back. When they get back, they get logged in and we do signature verification on those ballots. Now, the counties do that a little bit differently. Some counties have a security sleeve where you can't see the signature on the outside of the envelope. Some counties don't have that. And they've been doing it differently for years and years and years in Arizona, and that's okay as long as they're following the rules. So once the signature gets verified on an envelope, then the envelope gets open. And here's where an interesting part that I know Maricopa County does. Before the ballot is tabulated, they'll look at the ballot that has already been signature verified and it goes to a two-person board, and they'll gently pull the ballot out just a little bit, and they'll look at the ballot style number. Now, Maricopa County has 10,000 different ballot styles. Okay. And there's a code on the ballot, and they'll match the ballot style from the ballot onto the envelope that had the signature on it to make sure that that person gave you one of those ballot styles that matches the elections for which they're eligible to vote. That takes a lot of time. And so people are like, why didn't they just rip them open and blah, blah, blah? Because we don't do that. And so when people are like, why does it take so long to get results? Well, because we got a ton of people voting by mail and we got to validate that ballot matches that signature. A lot of people don't know that. And I remember 2024, my chief of staff and I, when Maricopa was saying, oh, we've got these, massive numbers of ballots and all this stuff. She and I went down because we're qualified elections officials, and we sat down across from each other and we're matching ballots and ballot styles, doing the checking, just like a whole ton of other people. But we weren't getting paid overtime or anything. We just went in there to help alleviate the load. A lot of folks from our office did. In fact, we sent people up to St. John's in Apache County to help up there too. So we get engaged at that level, but we're not the ones running the show. The counties are running the show. Once the ballot gets pulled out, then the ballot still folded. Nobody's looked at who voted for who, gets put in one pile. The envelopes go in another pile. And then they count the number of envelopes, they count the number of ballots, and the envelopes go away. Then that same board of two people will grab the ballot and open it up and stick it in the middle in between them. And they will put that in a tray and send that off for tabulation. So the ballots are truly anonymous because you're not looking at who's voting for who because you got so much work to go through. Anyway, and that's just Maricopa. The other counties have slightly different processes, but they still have that accountability. So that's one election. That's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is election day voters. So they're going to walk into a polling place. They're going to go check in, and then I'll give you, again, the Maricopa example. They'll check in at the site books, which we created under my administration. You're welcome. And they'll scan their ID. It'll pop up, and if it matches, then off you go. Here's they'll get you a receipt. You go over and you pick up your ballot style. Again, the same ballot style that you heard about in the ballot by mail. They'll pick it up. They'll go to the little booth. They'll fill in all their little bubbles, 82 of them in the last election on 2 pages. And then they'll walk over in Maricopa to the tabulator. They'll feed their ballot through the tabulator, and off you go. Now, the great thing about that is you still have that paper record because you have that paper ballot. And then at the end of the day, the little card from the back of the tabulators gets pulled out and the ballots get put in a bag and they all get transported down to the warehouse and the cards get fed into the server, which is not connected to the internet. They'll compile the numbers and an hour later you start getting the results from the ballot by mail. And then as the night goes on, the rest of these updates happen. And it's different because when you have so many ballot by mails, 80% of them, you can't do precinct by precinct reporting. So back in the old days, when you were counting at the precinct would call in and say, here's our numbers for all, 37 of our voters, because precincts were way smaller back in the day, or whatever, 200 voters. Now you've got a couple thousand voters, and you're just not going to be able to do it. But they would call in, and the report that you get would show, here's the precinct and here's the votes. So that's why estimating who's voted, how much they voted, it's harder to call an election because you don't have that kind of geographic division that you used to have. And I think people who complain about network results, not network predictions, I should say, not coming in on election night, they're ignoring the fact that we don't report our elections the way we used to. And they're purposefully misleading people. You can't have a network prediction based on precinct modeling when you're not reporting your results on precinct models. It's just not how it works. And so the expectation that we should be getting all of our numbers, on the night of, well, what they're saying is the networks should be able to predict on the night of, because nobody gets results the night of. I don't care if you're Florida or France, you're not getting your results on the night of. That's not how this works. You've got to go through and check your numbers. Then you have a formal canvas, and that's where your official numbers come in. So a lot of what we're doing is really trying to debunk, trying to educate, trying to push people towards the truth in a sober-minded, really kind of approachable way as we push our way through all of this stuff, Penny. And I'm really excited that the league is supporting the right kinds of stuff, just common sense, voter-centric, voter-friendly approach that's going to help us keep the wheels on this thing.
So, Adrian, I don't want to. I know you were going to go into some technical stuff, but I think we really are eager to hear your opinion on a couple of things that would also address how we might do a much heavier lift, if you will, in some of these issues. But before I get to that, one is about the closing of drop boxes the Friday before election. There was some to cure the signatures. We are not supportive of it, but I'd like to hear if there might be a contrary point of view.
Yeah, well, I'm not supportive of it either, because what it does is it narrows the voters' access, and it does it, and the rationale behind it is, well, we want to get our results faster, so that'll help us get faster results. That's not going to help us get faster results. It's not. What would help us get faster results is if the counties were given the resources necessary and the ability to continue to receive and tabulate ballots, process and tabulate ballots through election day. We can't do that right now. The law does not allow the processing and tabulation of ballots through election day. And so when you look at all of the ballots that come in at the last second, all the people that are turning in their ballots on that last weekend, and they're saying, oh, that last weekend, everybody's pushing their ballots on us, so we got to stop it on Friday. Well, wait a minute. Why don't you give us the resources we need to process and tabulate those ballots, not just through the weekend, but on election day also. And then we can have a bigger proportion of those results at that 8 p.m. number that you guys want so badly. So instead of actually helping have more access for voters, what they're doing is they're saying the networks can't predict our elections fast enough for us, so we're going to close down access to voting early. But that's dumb. And it puts the onus on the voter instead of putting the onus on the government. And so it's a problem looking for a solution is what it is. It genuinely is a problem looking for a solution. And I also think this one's motivated by politics as well, because there's a mythology out there that some voters vote later than other voters. Well, that's just not true. Voters vote whenever they vote, and there's no really good way to track that because all of the ballots go into the same piles, and up until through the end of that week, you're just getting whatever you can and tabulating it, and whatever comes in later comes in later. There's no numbers that we can tell because we can't process and tabulate those ballots on the last day. So those
Mm,
first set of next results might be the ones that got turned in on election day, not the ones that got turned in immediately prior on the weekend, right? We just don't know. There's no way to look at that. So, I get frustrated when I hear folks saying we want to narrow access for voters because the networks won't give us their election night results fast enough.
mm,
That's exactly
mm,
what they're saying. Now,
yeah.
when we talk about it, and this gets to your other point about what we can do, what we need to do is stop talking about election night results as election night results because that's not what they are.
Yeah.
They are network predictions. These are predictions from the Christian Science Monitor, from the Associated Press, from the New York Times, from Fox News. They're not results, they're predictions. We're the only ones that can give results. They show up on our website when they show up, whether it's a day later or a week later. Now, you can estimate, just like they do, who's going to win based on how many votes are outstanding and what the percentage is of the spread at that time. But that's all they're doing is their best educated statistical guess. So, one of the things we can do is stop talking about quicker results as if election night network predictions are actually election results, because they're not. And we got to stop falling into that rhetorical trap.
Thank
So,
you,
yeah,
Adrian. I'm so glad you made that messaging statement because you're right. There's a lot we can do as a league to use the correct language so that we are pushing harder against this sort of a false
yeah,
narrative, if you will. Now, this is I'm not sure how you would approach this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. There was
sure.
a legislation coming through about forcing the independent party from having to change its name. There was an article about that. And tell us a little bit about what's that about and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I will be wearing my nonpartisan Secretary of State hat for the following statement. Not a statewide elected Democrat, but a nonpartisan Secretary of State hat. The political parties are scared to death that having an affiliated party, I'm going to make that distinction, an affiliated party called the Arizona Independent Party will throw the two-party control out the door.
Mm,
Because right now the two parties have total control over our electoral systems. Okay.
mhm,
Right now, the parties get to decide who votes in their primaries. The parties get to decide if they're going to hold a presidential preference election. And this is all taxpayer funded, by the way. The parties don't have to pay for a presidential preference election. You do as a taxpayer. The parties don't have to pay for their primaries, which really only gives you a nominee to the general election. It should be a party function. The state pays for it. And by the way, the presidential preference election, think about this. For the presidential preference elections that we have in March every 4 years, you're not even voting for a presidential candidate. You're voting for delegates to a political convention. The convention, which can change its own rules whenever it wants. So these party functions are being funded by taxpayer dollars. And as long as the two parties understand that they reap all of these benefits for free, they're not going to want to change the system. So when an Arizona Independent Party shows up and says, hey, guys, we might want to throw a wrench in the works here. We might throw off all of your estimates for who's going to win a general, who might win, this seat, who might win that seat. We could change the makeup of the state legislature so that you have these independents who actually have the swing votes instead of the partisans one direction or another. Like, this is scaring the politicos to death. It's scaring the Democrats so much that they sued me. And the Republicans joined them in suing me. So you could say this. I'm the one guy who can bring Democrats and Republicans together for a common cause. And here's why I did what I did. Let me tell you what I did. The No Labels Party, which had about 44,000 voters registered as No Labels parties, organized as a political party. And what they did originally was say, we at the national level of No Labels we're only going to run a presidential candidate. Remember, they did this back late 2023, early 2024. And they got their petition signatures and they're like, we're an organized party in Arizona, but nobody can run for any other office except president under the No Labels banner in Arizona. And I was like, huh, that's funny because your petitions say otherwise and I say otherwise because you can't do that from the national party. You don't have any rulemaking authority over that. The No Labels Party became a regular party under the regular party rules when they met the threshold, and those citizens signed the petitions saying so. So I told the No Labels National Party they could pound sand. I say that a lot to people in Washington, D.C. I said, pound sand, your No Labels Party can run whoever they want. Okay, everybody, fine. We won the lawsuit. They didn't even run a presidential candidate. But now there's this little No Labels Party bouncing around down there. And these guys said, hey, let's take that No Labels Party and change the name, right? Now you have a name change where these folks got together under their own rules, under their own bylaws. I didn't interfere with any of that stuff. They came to me and they said, we're petitioning you to reflect the name change that we've chosen. And I'm like, I asked my lawyers, I asked the Attorney General's office, can I stop this if I wanted to? And they're like, nope, you don't have any authority. Now, if I was the Secretary of State in California, I would have authority. If I was the secretary, because there's a statute that says the secretary can prevent confusion or whatever, right? Now I said, well, independents are known as independents in Arizona. We've got it in statute. We've got it in the rule book. But I had no guidance. I had no power to do that. So I was like, fine, effective December 1st, you get to be the Arizona Independent Party. We're changing your name. Congratulations, go have a steak dinner. They did. And everybody knew it was going to happen because I issued a public letter to the rest of the world saying, hey, effective December 1st. And nobody tried to stop it from happening ahead of time. The Democrats didn't file an injunction with the court to say he can't do this, stop it. The Republicans didn't file an injunction with the court to say he can't. They waited until after it went into effect, which I was sitting there thinking, come on, guys, but I can't give my party legal advice against me, the office holder. I can't do that. So I was sitting there racking my brains trying to figure out why nobody was doing that. Well, they finally did after the name change became official. And that is working its way through the courts. Since then, this affiliated party, now I'm saying the word affiliated again because it's important, represents still about 44,000. I think they've gained some, but let's just say 45,000 for the sake of the conversation. Affiliated independents. That means they are Arizona Independent Party affiliates. There's a huge number of non-affiliated independents, and I'll say this, independents, because that's just what we traditionally call them. So there are two kinds of independents in Arizona right now. There are affiliated party members under the Arizona Independent Party, and there are non-affiliated independents who are actually no party designated voters. They might be called other, they might be called whatever, but they're not affiliated with a political party. Two different kinds, both in the vernacular independents. One's affiliated, one's not. There's an affiliated primary for governor. There are two people who are gathering signatures to get on the ballot. That party's going to have a primary, right? There is an affiliated independent running, I think, in Congressional District 1. I don't know for sure. They were going to file, they have filed. I don't know. I heard that somewhere. But imagine what happens politically at the end if you have an independent running for CD1, a very competitive congressional district. Who gets those voters? The non-affiliated voters, when you got somebody who's legitimately called an independent running. The Democrat needs the independents. The Republican needs the independents. The independent's going to be grabbing the independents. Where does the balance go? Right? Who wins in the plurality? So that's why these political parties are so upset. And to me, as the nonpartisan office holder, I think this is absolutely delicious because it shows the power of small groups of citizens who can get together and create havoc for those folks who have what appears to be immutable power in the organizations of the political parties. This one little group of people have thrown this whole thing up, and it's all cattywampus now, right? So the little d Democrat in me, the person who believes in American democracy and the power of the people, the political power of the people, a small number of very dedicated people making a huge difference, it is playing out in front of me. I love it. As a Democrat now, yikes. Because the political outcomes, if I take those into consideration, the political outcomes might not be so great for my party. And in some cases, they might not be so great for the Republican candidates. So this is the way that I separate what my duty is and what my preference is. I drop my preference out of the picture when I'm talking about my duty as the office holder. There's a reason that I've lost all my hair over the last couple of years, because this kind of schizophrenia is really stressful. But I make decisions in this office, I think, as decision makers should, dispassionately, because my passion as a Democrat is to uphold and promote the values of that type of partisan view. Generally speaking, sometimes I disagree with my party, but let's not worry about that. Generally speaking. But I can't do that because I didn't swear an oath to the Democratic Party. I swore an oath to the Constitution of the United States and the state of Arizona. And that means that when a small group of citizens petitions for the redress of grievances, utilizes their free speech, and gets together under their freedom of association, how can I say no? I can't. Political outcomes be what they will. So anyway, that's a peek into
Adrian,
my decision making.
no. That's that helped us actually understand the impact of that particular legislation, because we've had
Yep.
quite a bit of conversation about this. Is very confusing, you know.
Yeah.
I want to segue back to the
Sorry,
real.
Penny, can I add just one more thing, please?
Yes, please.
It is currently against the law to organize a communist party in Arizona. So it is not without precedent that the legislature can disallow a certain type of party to organize. Okay. I just want, that's
Okay.
the context here. Just in full disclosure, they're not doing something that they haven't done before and that the courts haven't allowed. So,
Okay.
like
All
it or
right.
not, I just wanted to put that out there for kind
Oh,
of
I'm so
complete the
glad
picture.
yeah,
Yeah.
very glad you said that.
Yeah.
Adrian, I really want to shift to this very difficult issue, and that is that, yeah, and you brought it up, and, you know, I want to pull that thread a little bit more, and that is the issue of this real, you know, the grievance-based way in which our president approaches everything, and more importantly, the desire to use what we as the public are seeing as essentially thugs at the polling locations. And if we take our lessons, and if we take our any comfort from citizens standing up as they did in Minnesota in some really troubling things, share with us your thoughts on how might we as an organization help organize, how might communities step up in polling locations to ensure, because even though we have the 75-foot barrier, right? Okay.
Mhm.
The truth is sometimes if there should be a prevailing of no mail-in ballots, it could be that people have to go beyond the 75 foot to stand in line. And that's when they're fair game to being, you know, being masked thugs, just pulling people off the line and, you know, putting them in cars because they think that they are not eligible to vote, or, you know, without any evidence, or, you know, whatever. Because,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, these are scenarios that are really going through a lot of our minds, because we're seeing how it's happening everywhere. How might the communities in Minnesota, we know that communities are gearing up for that kind of behavior. We know in Arizona that's going to be there. And those communities are learning to form community barriers to protect the voters in line. So, I'm not saying that is the result, but I wanted to ask you about that. And what, as the state, can it do to protect our people at the polls?
Well, Penny, so I'm gonna give you a dissatisfactory answer, and I'm gonna warn you ahead of time. Okay, because there's a number of scenarios that myself, the chief executive, and the attorney general are working out, and we're walking through with our staff exactly what it is that you're talking about. But in talking about how we're going to, or we're planning on reacting to a variety of different scenarios, we might be revealing more than we would like the current administration in the White House to know. And so we are very reserved and very reluctant to be talking about how we're planning on reacting to this thing so that we can not get outmaneuvered. Excuse me. And that sounds cagey because it is. I'm sorry, but
no, but that's fine.
We're working on it, and it's just kind of the trust me sort of a thing. But it bothers me as much as it bothers anybody else, and I think we have to understand the fact that we are having this conversation tells us that we are not living in a regular democracy that we would understand 18 months ago. We're not, and we have to admit that to ourselves. We cannot put our heads in the sand. We cannot say this is not normal. This is America today. And it's a terrible thing. Now, the League of Women Voters has been engaged and involved. But I said it before and I'll say it again. If you're not doing anything about this, if you're just sitting back and watching this play out on TV, I am very jealous of your privilege. If you're not fully engaged, if you're not diving in, like Frances Willard Munns, the woman who stands in bronze as one of the first women voters in Arizona. She was a state senator, I think, from 1915 to 1917, memorialized for all eternity, right? You guys carry the mantle of a group of Americans who transformed the way power is earned and moved. You guys are the ones that, the League of Women Voters is so incredibly important, and your membership is so incredibly important because you're the citizens that make us move as a society and have moved us forward. So I'm not the one to tell you what to do next. I'm not the one to do the community organizing. My job is to make sure that the systems that we have work as well as possible. The community reaction has to be the community reaction. My activity has to stay within the law. I can't act in an extra legal, an extra judiciary, or an extra executive way. That's not for me to do because I believe in the systems that we are supposed to have, and I'm going to act within those systems. There's only so much that I can do to preserve these systems. I want to protect these systems, but I've got to use the same systems. That doesn't mean you have to follow the same restrictions that I'm under. That doesn't mean that you can't figure out how to learn from folks in other states who have figured out how to do their organizing. It doesn't mean that you can't go do the thing that you need to do as a good citizen to carry on that mantle, to earn that purple and gold, right? Those colors that really represent the fight that continues to this day. This is where we, the people, have to rise and exercise our power. I'm going to do everything that I can within the law so that I can make sure that we kind of preserve and protect the systems that we've got. But these folks are operating outside of the law and outside of the norm. And so while we're trying to figure out how to react within the law and try to keep the lid on this thing, y'all are the ones that need to be out there, swinging and singing, as they say, swinging those signs and singing those songs and making sure that you've got what you need to make it happen. So I said it was a dissatisfactory answer, and the answer is it's up to us as citizens, which means you personally, citizen, to make sure that these things happen and make sure that we are all prepared. I can't raise an army or lead an army through this. That's not how this works. I'm a
Adrian,
civilian guy.
Yeah, you're not that was not a dissatisfactory answer at all. I think that a reminder of how important it is that I think that we are taking some comfort from the fact that there are conversations happening at your executive
Yep.
level, and that always gives us a great deal of comfort. And the executive team has been very good about communicating back to us from what we need to do. As we go forward. I'm going to ask you one more question. We're close to the end of our time. How does the and how does the lieutenant governor process work?
Well, I am the last Secretary of State who is Arizona's lieutenant governor. I am a member of the Lieutenant Governors Association nationally and the DLGA, Democratic Lieutenant Governors Association, and that will not happen. God willing, and the creek don't rise, I get reelected. I will just be the little old Secretary of State, second in line for the governorship, not first in line, as I am right now after November. The governor nominee of the parties will select their lieutenant governor nominee very much the same way the president of the United States selects a vice president running mate. They will not appear separately on the ballot. They will run as a ticket. So you'll have a Republican governor, lieutenant governor. You'll have a Democratic governor, lieutenant governor. You might have an independent governor, lieutenant governor. Hell, the Libertarians might get it together and actually have candidates this year too. So that's how it's going to work. And that's because by virtue of a vote, we as the people authorized the creation of a new executive office in Arizona a few years ago called the lieutenant governor. So there will be a separate person fulfilling that role. It will no longer be me, and that's okay. I got enough work
Adrian,
to do.
yeah. Well, we are very grateful, Adrian, for your leadership and your strength and courage and the battles
Thank you.
you've taken. We stand with you. We stand behind you. And wherever we can participate in some of those battles, especially on the litigation side, you know that the league is ready to step up at a moment's call as needed. And we anticipate there might be again fraud challenges as the league. We're preparing to watch out for that and be ready to litigate, as much as we can. Thank you, Adrian. What a terrific presentation. And we are very, very grateful for your wisdom, your friendship to the league, and I'm so glad you reminded us not to sit and watch TV as people of privilege, but to use our privilege to hold those signs and to speak out. Thank you, everyone, for joining this. This has been one of our wonderful lunch and learns, and we expect nothing less from Secretary Fontes, and we're so, so grateful to him. And yes, what a terrific presentation. Secretary Fontes, I hope you will have a few moments to get something to eat before you're off to whatever your next meeting is. And to
I
thank
might.
yeah, and thanks, Selena and the staff, for staying on. We totally appreciate everything that you've said and all the explanations you've given. I hope you will come back and talk to us because we did not get to hear your technical and your geeky explanation, and I love them. So I'm hoping to send that up again. Cindy, we're not accepting any hands raised. So if you have a question, you need to post it on the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Penny, and thank you to the league for your continued, not only your support, but your fight. It's very welcome, and I do need to run, so I will take off. Have a great one.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Penny.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.